Good evening, class. This is going to be a pre-recorded lecture that I'll upload to YouTube due to Southeastern closing for Hurricane Zeta. This will be the lecture number 5 out of 6 for exam 3. So you will have to take notes on this lecture because a lot of this material is going to be on the exam. And remember, if you have any questions about this, just email me and be sure to include your name and class section and all that. But what we're going to do is, last time we left off, we were talking about the election of 1840, which put William Henry Harrison into the White House. And unfortunately for Harrison, he gave this lengthy inauguration speech in the freezing cold, and unfortunately he died of either typhoid or pneumonia, becoming the first president to actually die in office. So his vice president, John Tyler, is now the 10th president of the United States, only after 31 days of Harrison being actually in office. The two prominent candidates were Henry Clay for the Whigs and Martin Van Buren for the Democrats in the election of 1844. John Tyler had successfully alienated both parties over the Texas issue, which we'll kind of talk about a lot more in this lecture here. He decided to run for re-election as an independent and run on the campaign slogan of Tyler in Texas. But he soon dropped out of the race because he lacked the support. The Democrats put up old Martin Van Buren once again, but he opposed the annexation of Texas. So Martin Van Buren actually lost the confidence of his old mentor and his old friend, Andrew Jackson. And Andrew Jackson actually disowned Martin Van Buren over this view. Van Buren also lost Southern support, so instead, the Democrats put up this guy by the name of James K. Polk. James K. Polk obviously was, he was pro annexation of Texas, and Polk goes on to be the 11th president of the United States by receiving 170 electoral college votes to Henry Clay's 105 electoral votes. This is like Henry Clay's 4th time running for president, and he still can't get in the White House. So who is this James K. Polk guy? Polk was the former Speaker of the House and a former governor of Tennessee. Polk wanted to annex Texas, and quite frankly, he was a rather loyal Democrat who frankly hated the Whigs and anyone that had anything to do with the Whig Party. Polk became the first dark horse candidate, and really the meaning of dark horse candidate is someone who was really not expected to win. So I'm sure Henry Clay thought that this was going to be a sure win for him, but all of a sudden here comes this guy, James K. Polk, from out of nowhere. He's a dark horse candidate, and Polk wins. Polk ran on the platform that America would annex Texas, and that America had a clear and unquestionable claim to all of the Oregon Territory, which, if we remember, is co-owned by the United States and Great Britain. Polk's strategy actually worked. Running on the idea of American expansionism was working well for the Democrats. It forced Henry Clay and the Whigs to actually alter their view on the annexation of Texas. Clay, at the last minute, stated that he had no objection to the annexation of Texas as long as it does not bring dishonor, war, and if it is accepted by the will of the American people. Polk was only 49 years old at the time when he was elected to the presidency, and this made him the youngest president in American history at this point. He actually earned the nickname Young Hickory because he resembled Andrew Jackson, and much like Jackson, he did not support high tariffs, the national bank, or federally funded roads. So he's very much a Jacksonian Democrat, and that's for sure. His work ethic, Polk's work ethic, was impeccable. He typically worked from dawn to midnight, and he rarely took a vacation. This intensity eventually kills Polk. At the age of 53 in 1849, He was just 3 months out of the office of the presidency, and unfortunately, it just catches up to him, and he dies 3 months after leaving the office. So the biggest campaign issue at this time is obviously the Texas question. That's going to be a big thing for you guys to know, no doubt. But the biggest campaign issue, again, in the election of 1844 is Texas. In the final months of the John Tyler presidency, he actually asked Congress to annex Texas via a joint resolution. This joint resolution, it only required a simple majority, which was 50% in Congress, instead of a treaty of annexation that required 2/3 majority vote in Congress, which was 66%. The joint resolution passed in Congress, but just barely. Most of the Whigs voted against it, obviously, because John Tyler, being a Democrat himself, the Whigs obviously aren't going to support any Democrat motion, especially when it comes to the annexation of Texas. Most of the Whigs, again, they vote against it, but on the 29th of December, 1845, Texas became the 28th state in the Union and the 15th state to allow slavery. But on the 16th of February, 1846, the flag of the Lone Star Republic came down and an American flag was raised over Texas. In 1846, Texas had around 100,000 white Americans and around 38,000 African American slaves. By 1850, the population of Texas had soared by over 50%. Most of these people were American Southerners who were looking to take part in that fertile land in Texas to grow a ton of cotton. So not only does the Polk administration have to answer the Texas question, they also have to answer this Oregon question. The Texas question had been settled, but now President Polk had to deal with the Oregon Territory and America's old, and especially when it comes to dealing with America's old rival, Great Britain. The Democrats were known as expansionists, aka those who wanted America to achieve manifest destiny from sea to shining sea. The Oregon Territory was split in ownership between America and Great Britain. President Polk was ready to risk war with Great Britain if they did not bend to the Americans' demands. Britain, on the other hand, was not willing to risk yet another conflict with America, so Polk's Secretary of State, James Buchanan, signed the Buchanan-Pakenham Treaty. This extended the American northern border to the 49th parallel after the Oregon question had been settled. The Polk administration then focused their attention on two things. First of all, there was the rising tensions between America and Mexico. Secondly, the Polk administration also wanted to acquire California. So the biggest thing that you guys need to know is that Polk's Secretary of State, James Buchanan, he signs the Buchanan-Pakenham Treaty, which extends America's most northern border to the 49th parallel, where it is today. So now we have the Texas question settled. Now we have the Oregon question settled. What about California? In regards to California, the Polk administration wanted Texas, Oregon, and now California. They wanted California because of the great seaports in San Diego and San Francisco. The Polk administration feared that either Great Britain or France would try to take California if they did not try to do so themselves. President Polk ordered a Navy commander by the name of John D. Sloat, S-L-O-A-T, to capture and occupy the seaport of San Francisco with the full might of the U.S. Navy, and if there were issues between America and Mexico, he could actually use force if need be. Hostilities between America and Mexico started in May of 1846, so Sloat had already set sail for California. When they arrived in early July of 1846, they actually removed the flag of the Republic of California and raised the American flag, and they proclaimed that California was now a part of the United States. Another gentleman by the name of John C. Fremont, he was actually one of the most important people to advocate for the settlement of Mexican-controlled California. He was a second lieutenant in the U.S. Army and he was actually part of the U.S. Topographical Corps, who was in charge of mapping out western lands in the U.S. So, of course, he would be attracted to California. Fremont spent a considerable portion of his life mapping out the Oregon Territory by drawing maps and discovering new wildlife, new plants, things of that nature, no pun intended. He often wrote these incredibly detailed stories about the American western frontier, and it earned him the nickname the Pathfinder. Many of these stories were very intriguing to a lot of people, and they were very interested in expanding out west. In December of 1845, his adventures in the Oregon Territory eventually lead him and his men to Mexican-controlled California. The Mexican government was very suspicious of Fremont and ordered him to leave. Fremont, though, he received direct orders from President James K. Polk to actually encourage a rebellion in California. This would help the U.S. take California from Mexico. Fremont and his men were able to start a rebellion in California, and by the 25th of June, Fremont and his men, they raised the flag that featured a grizzly bear and a star, which indicated that the Republic of California was now out of the hands of Mexico. All of California was actually in U.S. control by the time the Mexican-American War had actually broken out along the Texas border. So let's take a look at this Mexican-American War. On the 6th of March, 1845, just 2 days after President James K. Polk had become president, Mexico broke relations Mexico had broken relations with the U.S. Over the annexation of Texas. Polk actually wanted war with Mexico so he could annex Texas and what would eventually become the state of New Mexico. President Polk did not want the Americans to fire first. Instead, he would rather have Mexico be the ones to fire first, so it didn't seem as if Polk was just invading Mexico to get these lands. So he doesn't want them to fire first. He also didn't want the conflict to produce a military hero who would be a good Whig candidate for president. So he wanted a war just short enough so that he could claim California and New Mexico, but not one that was long enough to sort of create this really great military hero for the Whig Party. And we'll see how that kind of doesn't really happen and actually goes against the wants of President Polk, but we'll see that here in a minute. President Polk actually ordered General Zachary Taylor to take position around Corpus Christi, where the Nueces River emptied into the Gulf of Mexico. This is very important, and you're going to want to take note of this. Mexico proclaimed that the Nueces River was the border, so the Mexican government actually considered Zachary Taylor taking up position around Corpus Christi to be an invasion. So, of course, the Mexican officials and the Mexican government and the Mexican military, they attack General Taylor's forces on the 9th of May, 1846. Many people disagreed with President Polk's decision to go to war, but regardless, he authorized Congress to recruit about 50,000 American troops to fight Mexico. Many northern politicians, they argue that Polk wanted to go to war to extend the institution of slavery in the American South. Polk, on the other hand, he denies these accusations, and he argued that he wanted to extend America's borders to the Pacific to promote national unity. Polk allowed General Santa Anna, who had been exiled to Cuba after he was captured at the Battle of San Jacinto. So he's in exile in Cuba, but Polk allows General Santa Anna to return back to Mexico because he promised President Polk that he would end the conflict if he was allowed to go back to Mexico, become president, and all this. Turns out, General Santa Anna, he lied. So now he's back as president of Mexico, and he was raising armies to fight the Americans. General Zachary Taylor was unable to win a decisive victory, so President Polk actually replaces General Zachary Taylor with another guy by the name of General Winfield Scott. So we'll take a look at him. General Winfield Scott, he led an all-out assault on Mexico City, which was the capital of Mexico. But first, Winfield Scott had to get past the city of Veracruz. And this city, Veracruz, was actually the most heavily defended place in North America. So this was going to be very difficult for Winfield Scott. General Scott's invasion of Veracruz went off flawlessly. This was an incredibly impressive victory for the Americans at Veracruz, and his victory here sort of makes Winfield Scott a national hero. But this is exactly what President Polk was trying to avoid, because General Winfield Scott was also a Whig. The Mexican-American War doesn't really last long, and Mexico City had already fallen to General Winfield Scott. General Santa Anna actually resigned his post as president and dictator of Mexico, and he actually flees the country only to return a little bit later. Peace talks between the U.S. and Mexico began on the 2nd of January, 1848. The peace talks were held at the city of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which was right outside of Mexico City. The peace talks lasted forever because several different Mexican officials claimed to have authority to speak for the nation. The American representative at these peace talks was a guy by the name of Nicholas P. Trist. Nicholas P. Trist. He was an American diplomat of the U.S. State Department, and he was a pretty decent lawyer. He negotiated the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which ends the Mexican-American conflict, although President Polk actually recalled Trist back to the U.S. because at first he was fairly unhappy with his negotiation skills. Trist then wrote a 65-page response to President James K. Polk explaining why he needed to be in Mexico. He defied presidential orders and offered General Santa Anna $15 million for the previously owned Mexican territory in America. So let's take a look at this Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo was successfully negotiated on the 2nd of February, 1848. Mexico was humiliated in the treaty, and Mexico signed away what would be the states of Texas, California, Arizona, and New Mexico. They also signed away lands in what would become the states of Colorado, Utah, Wyoming, and Nevada. The Mexican-American War was the first time that the U.S. had conquered and occupied another country. 13,000 American troops would die from this conflict. But of those 13,000 American troops, 11,550 of them would die just from diseases like dysentery and measles. This military victory over Mexico was also politically divisive. It reinvigorated the debate over the institution of slavery. A good number of Americans disagreed with the war that seemed like a war of conquest and in an attempt to expand the institution of slavery. General Zachary Taylor commented that he thought the war was unjust and many Americans needlessly lost their lives. President Polk naively thought that expanding the American Union would promote peace, harmony, and unity. Unfortunately, when Texas became a state, gold was soon discovered in California, sparking a debate about the extension of slavery into the lands acquired from Mexico. All the lands that were ceded to the United States from the Mexican-American War became known as the Mexican Cession. This is the third largest acquisition of land by the United States. Mexico signed away 529,000 acres of land to the United States. The U.S. also purchased about another 30,000 acres or so from Mexico in something called the Gadsden Purchase. This happened several years after the signing of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. The U.S. purchased more lands from Mexico. The Gadsden Purchase included areas of land that included the states of New Mexico and even into southern Arizona. This rounded off the continental U.S. and it actually provided land to put transcontinental rail lines. Eventually, the South Pacific Railroad Company would put railroad tracks in this area around the years of 1881 to 1883. The Mexican government was strapped for cash, so the purchase treaty was ratified on the 25th of April 1854, where America agreed to pay Mexico another $10 million for these lands. The guy who was in charge of doing this was a guy by the name of James Gadsden, hence the Gadsden Purchase. He was a U.S. ambassador to Mexico, and he was able to craft this deal with General Santa Anna, who was still president of Mexico. But there still remained the issue of slavery in these new territories. So something very interesting, and this is probably one of the most divisive things to come out of this time period, something called the Wilmot Proviso. With the issue of slavery being still being a hot button topic in the new territories that were acquired from Mexico, David Wilmot, he actually came up with a solution. David Wilmot was actually a freshman congressman from Pennsylvania, but he supported the annexation of Texas as a slave state. He argued, though, that any new territory that should be acquired by the United States from Mexico after the Mexican-American War should not have slavery in it. Key word, it should not have slavery in it. President Polk, he dismissed the Wilmot Proviso, stating that it was a, quote, mischievous and foolish amendment. And Polk also argued that this had nothing to do with the Mexican-American conflict. The House of Representatives approved of the Wilmot Proviso, but the Senate never voted on it. They took a break and they reconvened in December of 1846. President Polk actually convinced David Wilmot to withhold his amendment, but you cannot undo what he started. Wilmot's Proviso, this idea, would actually frame the debate over westward expansion and the institution of slavery for the next 15 years, and it set the pace for America to plunge itself into the American Civil War. Well, guys, that ends lecture number 5 for exam 3. I will hopefully see you guys again next week, next Monday, and that'll be the final lecture for exam 3. Again, if you need anything, please email me. But until then, I'll see you guys next time. Stay safe and stay healthy, especially during this hurricane. But I will again see you next time.